Imagine you are an engineer working the night shift at a nuclear power plant. It is 1:23 a.m. You are running a routine safety test, something you have done before, something that should be simple. And then, in the span of a few seconds, everything goes catastrophically wrong. The reactor you are standing next to, a reactor designed to be one of the safest in the world, explodes with a force so violent that it blows a 1,000-ton steel and concrete lid off the top like a bottle cap. The explosion releases a plume of radioactive material into the atmosphere that will eventually spread across Europe, contaminating millions of square kilometers of land and exposing millions of people to radiation. You do not die instantly. That would be a mercy. Instead, you die slowly over the next few days or weeks as the radiation destroys your cells from the inside out, turning your organs to mush while you are still conscious. This is not a hypothetical scenario. This happened to real people. On April 26, 1986, at the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in Soviet Ukraine. Reactor 4 exploded, releasing 400 times more radiation than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The official Soviet death toll was 31 people, firefighters and plant workers who died in the immediate aftermath, but that number is a lie. The real death toll? Some estimates say 4,000. Others say 60,000. Some studies suggest close to 100,000 people died from radiation-related cancers in the decades that followed. The truth is, we still do not know the real number, and governments, both Soviet and modern, have spent the last 40 years making sure we never will. Here's what should terrify you even more. Chernobyl was not a freak accident. It was not an act of God or an unforeseeable catastrophe. It was the result of human error, institutional cover-ups, cost-cutting measures, and a reactor design that prioritized power output over safety. And today, right now, there are 440 nuclear reactors operating around the world. Most of them were built in the 1970s and 1980s, the same era as Chernobyl. They are aging. Maintenance is expensive. Safety protocols are sometimes ignored. And in an era of social media, misinformation, political instability, and 24-hour news cycles, the question is not if another nuclear disaster could happen. The question is when. So here's what we are going to do today. If a reactor exploded in 2026, with all our modern technology, all our communication systems, all our supposed transparency, would we handle it better than the Soviet Union did in 1986? Would governments tell us the truth? Would social media help or make everything worse? And more importantly, are the 440 reactors still running actually safe? Or are we all just living on borrowed time? Welcome to If History Repeats. Today, we go back to April 26, 1986, to the night shift that ended the world for thousands of people. And then we ask, what if it happened again? Let's begin. Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant in 1986 was one of the Soviet Union's pride and joy facilities. It had 4 reactors, RBMK-1000 reactors, a Soviet design, and 2 more under construction. These reactors were supposed to be some of the safest in the world. Soviet propaganda called them safer than a samovar, a traditional Russian tea kettle. The plant provided about 10% of Ukraine's electricity. It employed thousands of people. And just 3 kilometers away was the city of Pripyat, a modern Soviet city built specifically to house Chernobyl workers and their families. 50,000 people lived there. They had schools, hospitals, an amusement park that was set to open on May Day. It was a showcase city, proof that Soviet nuclear power was not just safe, but the future. But there was a problem with the RBMK reactor design that no one wanted to talk about. It had what is called a positive void coefficient. In simple terms, this means that if something starts to go wrong, the reactor does not slow itself down, it speeds itself up. It is a runaway feedback loop built into the design. Western reactors were designed with negative void coefficients. If something goes wrong, the reaction slows down automatically. The Soviets knew about this flaw, but fixing it would have been expensive, and admitting the flaw would have been embarrassing, so they kept it quiet and told the operators to just be careful. On the night of April 25, 1986, the night shift at Reactor 4 was scheduled to run a safety test. The goal was simple. If the reactor lost power, could the residual energy from the turbines keep the cooling systems running long enough for backup generators to kick in? It was a test they had tried before and failed. This time, they were determined to make it work. But almost immediately, things started going wrong. The day shift had delayed the test, so it got handed off to the night shift, a less experienced crew. The test required reducing the reactor's power output to a low level, but they reduced it too much, so much that the reactor almost shut down completely. Trying to bring the power back up, they disabled multiple safety systems. They pulled out too many control rods, the rods that absorb neutrons and keep the reaction under control. By 1:23 a.m., the reactor was in an incredibly unstable state. It was like balancing a pencil on its tip. And then someone pressed the emergency shutdown button. In most reactors, pressing the emergency shutdown button, called AZ5, drops all the control rods into the reactor core and stops the reaction immediately. But the RBMK design had another fatal flaw. The tips of the control rods were made of graphite, a material that actually increases reactivity for a few seconds before the absorbing part of the rod takes effect. So when the operators pressed AZ5, the reactor did not shut down. It spiked. Power surged to 30 times normal levels in less than 3 seconds. The fuel rods shattered. The cooling water instantly turned to steam. The pressure was so immense that it blew the reactor apart. A 1,000-ton steel and concrete lid, called the upper biological shield, was launched into the air like a frisbee. It landed vertically, leaning against the edge of the reactor hull, exposing the open reactor core to the night sky. Radioactive graphite and fuel fragments were ejected into the atmosphere. Fires started immediately. 2 plant workers died in the explosion, but most of the operators in the control room survived the initial blast. They did not understand what had happened. Radiation is invisible. You cannot see it, smell it, or taste it. The control room instruments were destroyed or giving non-system readings. Some of the operators went outside to see what was happening. They saw graphite, chunks of the reactor core scattered on the ground. Graphite is intensely radioactive. Picking up a piece with your bare hands would deliver a lethal dose in seconds. They did not know that. Some of them kicked pieces out of the way. One operator was sent to the reactor hall to assess the damage. He came back and reported that the reactor was intact because he refused to believe what he was seeing. Denial is a powerful psychological response. When the impossible happens, the human brain tries to rationalize it away. The reactor cannot be destroyed. It is impossible. Therefore, it is not destroyed. But it was, and every second that passed, more radiation poured into the atmosphere. The fire brigade from Pripyat was called. They arrived within minutes, not knowing they were walking into a radiation field thousands of times higher than lethal levels. They climbed onto the roof of the reactor building to fight the fires. They were wearing regular firefighter gear, no radiation protection, because no one told them they needed it. They stayed up there for hours, spraying water on burning graphite. By the time the fires were under control, many of them had absorbed fatal doses of radiation. Within weeks, their skin started to burn. Within weeks, they were dead. 28 firefighters and plant workers died from acute radiation syndrome in the weeks following the disaster. That's where the official Soviet death toll of 31 comes from, the people who died quickly and undeniably from radiation. But radiation doesn't just kill immediately. It kills slowly, over years, over decades. And the Soviet Union had no intention of admitting how many people were really going to die. Before we continue, I need to stop here and be completely transparent with you. Everything you just watched is documented historical fact. The explosion at Reactor 4, the flawed RBMK design, the operators pressing AZ5, the firefighters on the roof, the acute radiation deaths, all of it is verified by Soviet records, witness testimony, and independent investigations conducted after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is not speculation. It happened. It is real. It is on record. But what comes now is different. What comes now is analysis. Well-founded, evidence-based, scientifically grounded analysis of what would happen if a nuclear disaster like Chernobyl occurred today in 2026. This is not prophecy, this is not fear-mongering, this is an honest attempt to apply modern nuclear safety data, government transparency records, social media behavior, and disaster response studies to answer a single question. Would we do better than the Soviet Union did in 1986? And are the 440 nuclear reactors operating today actually safe? Or are we just pretending they are? Let's start with the facts. There are 440 nuclear reactors currently operating in 32 countries around the world. Nuclear power provides about 10% of global electricity. Most of these reactors were built in the 1970s and 1980s. The average age of an operating reactor today is over 30 years old. Some are over 50. Nuclear reactors have a designed lifespan, usually 40 years. After that, components degrade. Concrete becomes brittle, pipes corrode, welds crack. Extending the lifespan of a reactor requires constant maintenance, upgrades, and safety inspections. And that costs money. A lot of money. In some countries, that money is spent. In others, it is not. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. Since Chernobyl, we have had other nuclear accidents. In 2011, an earthquake and tsunami hit the Fukushima Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant in Japan. Fukushima was not some outdated Soviet reactor. It was a modern facility in one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, and it still melted down. 3 reactors went into full meltdown. Hydrogen explosions blew apart containment buildings. Hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated. A large exclusion zone was established. The cleanup is still ongoing and will cost hundreds of billions of dollars. No one died immediately from radiation, but the long-term cancer deaths are still being calculated. Fukushima proved that even modern reactors in wealthy, technologically advanced nations are not immune to catastrophic failure. So what would happen if a reactor exploded today? Let's say a reactor in Europe or the United States experiences a meltdown. What happens next? First, and this is critical, we would know about it almost immediately. In 1986, the Soviet Union tried to hide Chernobyl for as long as possible. They did not tell their own citizens. They did not warn neighboring countries. It was only when radiation detectors in Sweden, over 1,200 kilometers away, started going off that the world learned something had happened. The Soviets were forced to admit it. But even then, they lied about the scale. They downplayed the radiation release. They lied about casualties. They told people it was under control when it was not. Today, that would be much harder to hide, not because governments are more honest, but because information spreads too fast. If a reactor exploded in France or the United States, people would film it on their phones within seconds. It would be on Twitter or X within minutes. Live streams, TikTok videos, satellite imagery, independent radiation monitors run by civilians in universities. You cannot hide a nuclear disaster in 2026 the way the Soviets hid Chernobyl in 1986. The information gets out whether governments want it to or not. But here is the problem. Just because information spreads fast does not mean it is accurate. Social media is not designed to spread truth. It is designed to spread whatever is most engaging, and what is more engaging than panic. Within hours of a reactor explosion, social media would be flooded with rumors, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and conflicting reports. Some people would say the radiation is deadly and everyone within 500 kilometers needs to evacuate immediately. Others would say it is exaggerated and everything is fine. Governments would issue official statements, but in the age of distrust in institutions, how many people would believe them? If the government says, stay calm, the radiation is contained, do you believe that? Or do you assume they're lying to prevent panic, the same way the Soviets lied? And then there's the evacuation problem. Pripyat, the city next to Chernobyl, had 50,000 people. They were not evacuated until 36 hours after the explosion. By then, everyone in the city had been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Today, nuclear plants are often located near much larger populations. If a reactor near a major city exploded, you could be talking about evacuating millions of people. Do you know what happens when you try to evacuate millions of people at once? Gridlock, panic, chaos. Highways turn into parking lots. Trains are overwhelmed. Airports shut down. People fight over resources. Some people refuse to leave.
Others leave too late, and all the while, radiation is spreading. And then there's the long-term cost. Chernobyl's exclusion zone is still uninhabitable. Pripyat is a ghost city. The cleanup required hundreds of thousands of workers called liquidators, many of whom were exposed to radiation and died young. The Soviet Union built a massive concrete sarcophagus over Reactor 4 to contain the radiation, but it started crumbling. In 2016, a new structure, the new safe confinement, was completed. It cost over $1.7 billion, and it's only designed to last 100 years. After that, someone will have to build another one. Chernobyl will be a problem for longer than any government or nation is likely to exist. Now multiply that by 440 reactors. If even a small percentage of them fail over the next 50 years, we're talking about multiple exclusion zones, trillions of dollars in cleanup costs, and potentially millions of cancer deaths spread across decades. And the worst part? We might not even know the real death toll, just like Chernobyl. Governments will say official estimates are 4,000. Independent scientists will say closer to 60,000 or more, and 40 years later we'll still be arguing about it. So here we are, 39 years after Chernobyl, and 440 reactors are still running, most of them aging, some of them in countries with unstable governments or lax safety enforcement. And the question we have to ask ourselves is simple. Do we trust that every single one of those reactors is being maintained properly? Do we trust that every operator is well trained? Do we trust that no one is cutting corners to save money? Do we trust that if something goes wrong, governments will tell us the truth? If you made it this far, thank you. You're exactly who this channel was created for. Someone who is willing to sit with uncomfortable questions and not look away. Chernobyl happened because people ignored warnings, cut corners, and then lied about it. And the scary thing is not that it happened in 1986. The scary thing is how easy it could be to happen again. The technology has improved. The reactors are better. But human nature? That has not changed at all. If this made you think, share it with someone who also doesn't shy away from hard truths. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because every episode of If History Repeats takes you back to a moment that shaped the world and asks, what if it happened again? Next episode, we go to December 26, 2004. Tourists on beaches across Southeast Asia, families on vacation, and then the ocean pulls back further than anyone has ever seen. 230,000 people die in 6 hours across 14 countries. But here's what will haunt you. We had a tsunami warning system. Scientists knew the wave was coming. They had hours to warn people, and they did nothing. The deadliest tsunami in history, and the warning that was never sent. You won't want to miss it. I'm If History Repeats, and history always